everyone. Welcome to Mindset Nebula podcast, where we talk about SAP, we talk about design, UX, and everything around it. Today, we celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I have several very great guests with us today. It's Sarah Mahold.
Hello.
Sarah is our UX designer at Mindset, and she was our guest before when we talked about empathy and design. And I have Paru Shankar from Mindset,
Hello.
and we have Dan Flesher with us also from Mindset.
Hi there, everybody.
And I'm your host for today. I'm Yelena Perfilieva. And this episode is very unusual in two ways, because it's the first one where we record the video. That's why I have like full kabuki theater makeup. And this is also the first episode where we have the most female guests. So we finally outnumber the weakest gender, and Dan is our only representative for this episode. So very great to see our glamorous ladies of Mindset in this episode. So focus of this episode is about accessibility. And to start, I just would like to pose a question to everyone. So for you, what does accessibility mean for you? How it is important maybe in your life, or how do you think it is important in the software space?
Sure,
Yeah,
and I can get us started. I didn't just wanted to fill the gap there. For me, accessibility really just means that everyone has the same opportunity, I guess, to use the tools, I guess, in the context. So we design a lot of software for people, and in that context, to me, accessibility means that anyone is able to pick up and use those tools with the same level of functionality, hopefully with the same ease of use, regardless of what their specific needs for that may be. And I think, being that we say we're the human-centered enterprise at Mindset, our focus is to make work better for everyone. I think that, doesn't say it explicitly, but definitely implicitly there has to be a focus on, when we say everyone, meaning everyone and having it accessible for all. So.
It's a great point.
I think I do hit it on the head there too. I think accessibility, the definition is partly in the word itself. So making sure everyone has access to that same experience. And so I think that really is what accessibility means. You can approach it with inclusion in that that way that you approach a situation, an experience that you have, whether you're just going about doing your daily activities, or if you are interacting with software. Everyone approaches something different, no matter what. However, you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich might be different than how I make one. And so it doesn't matter. It's still a delicious sandwich, but how can you make it so that way everyone has a very similar experience? And so that was a minor example, but in the software, in the technology industry, it's really just how can we make an experience as enjoyable and also usable for someone who maybe has limited access in certain ways. And so that goes beyond everyone here.
I think what I really like the word you use, Sarah, is the inclusion, because when I think accessibility in my head, it really relates to inclusion. There are so many different types of people in the world, and I think nobody should be disadvantaged because of a different kind of ability that one might have, because getting all of us to collectively contribute is what would make the best ideas come out. And if nobody has the right kind of information or the same kind of information, then you don't get the similar kind of ideas at the same page. And getting that inclusivity is what will be very important in any kind of either workforce, corporate life, or even in just making a difference to society. And so making everything accessible to everybody in a similar way is what would bring the inclusion and would get everybody to participate on the same level. And that is for me what accessibility means.
I think these are really great points from everyone. And I feel that frequently um, we don't really think about accessibility much because it does not probably affect many people. So we kind of tend to brush it away. But for me personally, accessibility suddenly became very important when I got cataracts in one of my eyes a year ago, and I had to get an eye surgery. But for a long time, because there was a pandemic going on, I couldn't get surgery, so I had to get by with however poor vision I had. And all of a sudden, I realized how important accessibility really is, and how many websites and programs are very strangely very poorly accessible in many different ways. And that's just really something that people just don't think about, but suddenly can become important to us, especially everyone ages, so everyone can potentially be affected by it. And I think that's why it's very important to talk about it from different perspectives. So Sarah, I saw that Sarah prepared for us really great information for this podcast. So there are some statistics that we would like to start with. Sarah, do you want to talk about this?
Sure. I'll just kind of give an overview of whenever I talk about accessibility, it's helpful to have a little bit of context of what that actually means. And similar to what you were saying, Elena, is it might not impact you until some reason that makes you think of it. But just some statistics to show it a little bit. 1 in 4 Americans have a disability of some kind. And so what that means is that could be a visual disability, hearing disability, cognitive, or even a physical disability. And so those are just a few examples, but 1.3 billion people worldwide have some form of disability. So that is a lot of people. That's a huge portion of our population, and that's a huge portion of the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, whether you know it or not. And so I think those are some really important statistics just to show how much this is prevalent, whether or not it's something that you personally are aware of. And so in terms of, obviously we are in the technology industry, in terms of what that means for websites or anything else like that, there are really great resources out there that really do a lot of research as to how you can make your website accessible. And so WebAIM is one of those, and they just did a study in 2020 where they looked at some ways that you can improve your site, or there are failures of websites. And some of the main reason, or the biggest percentage of errors when it comes to a website is really when it comes to that visual impairment. So low contrast for text. So being able to even read what's on the website based on the color of the button, the color of the link is huge. And so I think that's just one example out of so many potential errors that exist on a website, but being able to actually understand and read and know what you're clicking before you click it is something that, I mean, everyone has experienced. And so how can we, as people in this industry, make it a more accessible place?
So obviously we all work in SAP space at Mindset. So I'm wondering if there are any specific tips that you can give to the SAP customers, how they can improve accessibility of their applications.
Definitely. There are a lot of resources out there. I think we'll maybe get to some of those later in the podcast here itself. But like the example that I mentioned before of low contrast, I think that that percentage is 86%. 86% of the websites that WebAIM researched failed to meet that contrast ratio. And so that contrast ratio allows your users to actually access and interact with your web pages. And so a simple tweak right now is to test that. And so there are really great plugins to Chrome or even to GitLab or anything like that, where you can test the contrast of the colors that you have, and you can see whether or not they're accessible. And those would be things like, there's a free one with Wave, or Axe by DQ, are just a couple of examples, but they would be able to test just what errors might exist on a minimal level for your site itself.
Yeah, and I think another good resource too, to check out. Now, this isn't going to test your applications, but so we work a lot, obviously, with Fiori interfaces. And so if you are working in Fiori and you haven't got a chance to check out the Fiori design guidelines out there on the web, I highly recommend that. But they have a specific section on accessibility where they address a lot of what comes with Fiori at an accessibility level, what is there as a framework, but that would require you to still enable and put thought into how that works. And so, you know, like Sarah mentioned, not having the right level of contrast in text and things like that, not having that legibility is a really common problem. If you use out of the box Fiori, they talk about how their themes are accessible, you know, how their colors, you know, and charting are meant to be differentiated enough to handle the different types of color blindness. I think where sometimes folks can get tripped up. Everyone wants to add their own theme. They want to brand their applications. They want to add their own color palette and styling to it, which is great. We would always encourage folks to do that, but that's where I've seen people get tripped up and taking something that, you know, might be out of the box accessible with, you know, the themes in Fiori or in UI5, and then they apply their own branding, which sometimes may not be accessible in and of itself, and they end up with those kinds of challenges. But you know, there is a lot of really good documentation out there for those that are building Fiori applications or designing those to check out. You know, it touches on theming, it touches on keyboard support, screen reader enablement, and I think it has both a design and a development side of the coin. So if you want to dive deeper in the technical aspects of how it's enabled within UI5 specifically, they have a lot of that information there as well. So, you know, there are a lot of resources out there if you want to seek out that information.
I think, Dan, you touched on a very important point, because it takes me back to when accessibility became important for me. I mean, I grew up in India, where you see a lot of disabled people right in front of your eyes on the street who cannot do anything just because they have the disability, and you become so immune to it. So it was actually not until 10 years back that this became important to me, when I was solution owner for SAP e-recruiting. I don't know how many of you remember the solution or have come across that solution, but it was, let's say, it needed a lot of work on the accessibility side. And that's when a customer asked us about accessibility, then I started even thinking about accessibility, right? So those were the days of WebDin Pro and so on. And since then, SAP has come really a long way from an accessible perspective. Just the Fiori guidelines that Dan, you were talking about is an example. But at the same time, I don't know how many customers really know that you can actually ask SAP for a document called VPAT for each of the solutions that will give you a very comprehensive guideline regarding what is important from an accessibility perspective for that particular solution that you have in mind. And that also can help you to decide, okay, this is how the solution looks like, and then subsequently take that further when you develop custom applications related to that solution, how you can link up the two and so on. So from that perspective, it's a very conscious development design that you need to do when you want to include everybody, because as you said, Dan, there are many blind aspects that we just don't think about. I mean, even in a Word document or an Excel, we put in colors, right? Red and green. Think of the colorblind people. How would they read that? So these are small things. In very small ways we can make a difference, and perhaps even even instead of red and green, think about yes, no, and all those things that even a screen reader can read. These are some of the things that we can keep in mind as we develop the custom applications.
This is great information, Paro. I'm curious, so to get this type of document, how would SAP customers go about getting it?
Yeah, on the website of SAP, there is a link to accessibility at sap.com, I think.
Oh.
And there's an accessibility website, and over there, the email address is given. You just have to write with the subject saying VPAT and for which solution, and then send a mail to this address, and then they will send it over to you. Or you can contact your account executive, and then they can arrange it for you. So both ways are possible, depends on the timeline that you require it in, right? So
yeah, and sometimes contact your account executive. It's a euphemism for talk to the hand.
Yeah,
They're not
let's
always...
say contact your network at SAP would be a good idea.
Right. Post on Twitter. You'll find it. Right. So yeah, great tips. Yeah, I didn't know about it. So great information, and great point about accessibility and branding, because I bet some companies do not really consider that. They just say, oh, this is our theme colors. They look great, but all right. So just want to talk about the next aspect of it. We talked about inclusivity a lot in the accessibility context. So one part of inclusivity includes different users of different devices. So what are your thoughts with aspects to, and feel free to talk about SAP products specifically or in general. Users of, I use desktop mostly. My phone is mostly for just personal use, like small apps. So I don't do business on phone or my iPad. But for the customers that do, what can you tell them about the accessibility aspects on different devices?
I think one thing, just pulling up a real example from a recent project that we've done and where we've had to sort of figure out how we best accommodate things are text sizes on mobile devices, and how, folks really expanding that and accounting for it is trying to find the right breaking point before it actually sort of collapses the entire usability of whatever application it is that we're trying to create. And it's happened on a couple of them. We know we did have users that use those settings on their phone where they can increase the font size pretty significantly, make it easier to read text messages or, just use websites in general, and that was something we had to sort of learn through testing and really sort of identify where those breaking points were, what our options for remediation were, so that we could still support the users that needed to expand the text sizes, so that the screens were legible for them, but also not have it reach a point where it no longer became a help anymore and was actually more of a hindrance. It was doing more harm than it was good by just having this like infinite expanding of text size. That's one example where we want to be able to support the increased sizes of fonts on phones, devices like that are smaller, that people might have a harder time seeing, but you also have to determine what's that final point of making sure it doesn't go too far and actually blow everything up. I think there's guidelines that say you should be able to increase font something like 200%, I want to say, or something along those lines, at least from an accessibility guideline standpoint. But you have to kind of watch the upper limit of that sometimes too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you definitely see that across not only a mobile device, but also when you go to a desktop, especially in SAP, if you have a table and let's say you want a table with 20 columns, that is going to be a huge influx of information. But who knows, your desktop might be smaller than my giant monitor screen. So how can we make sure that that's a similar experience no matter what, without cutting into that font size like you were mentioning, Dan, there? And I think another thing that we think about too when it comes to mobile or tablet devices versus desktop is how you interact with it. And so being actually able to click something with your finger versus a mouse is very different. And so we think about that when we approach it with a design perspective of how many pixels does this actually mean for you to have a finger to tap a button versus some clients have, like you mentioned, where you have someone who wants an increased font size on their screen. So already their button size is going to be a lot bigger too. And so how do you adapt for that while you're already shrunk down onto the smallest screen? And so you work through those challenges to make it an experience where you can still go through the tasks that you need to do on that phone versus a tablet versus a desktop and still be able to complete what it is that you need.
I think there is the whole aspect of also the font size is a very good example, right? So when you're also interacting with your clients, with your users or your own colleagues as well, you might be quite visually fine, whereas your colleague might really require a bigger font size. I say this from personal experience. I keep my font sizes very low, both on my mobile as well as on my screen. The resolution is pretty small, but at the same time, when I had to share my screen with another colleague, that colleague might have visual challenges or even just specs with a higher power. So just being mindful is a very good way to start off with regard to when you're always sharing your applications, you're always sharing your information and so on, as well as when you develop applications, you're developing it for users. Just think of the different types of users who will view it and think of a reasonable size font at that point of time. And the whole aspect of gestures is a very good important thing, right? So when you are designing mobile applications, think about how many of those gestures are actually accessible to different people. And maybe it is even just providing a workaround. It doesn't have to be that the immediate application that you have is accessible to everybody, but just think of a workaround for different types of different abled people and how they can access the same information. So
Yeah, personally, it always kind of ticks me off when those entitled users of very large screens share their humongous screens with tiny letters, and then they try to tell us something, and no one can really read what's written on their screen. I'm pretty sure they can. So I like that Sarah put together for us a really interesting list of different accessibility examples from the real life, and I would like to talk about this more. So one of them was very kind of surprising feature. I never perceived it as accessibility feature. It's automatic doors at the store, for example. If you're exiting from, let's say, grocery store, you have your hands full with your purchases, and then doors automatically open for you. So this is really nice. And personally, I use very frequently subtitles, especially in the foreign movies, that like British movies or Irish, or something that's non-US accent that's sometimes difficult to understand. So that's very helpful, not just for people who have any disability, but for many different users. So I'm wondering if you would like to share some examples, maybe talk about some of the Sarah's examples or share something from your personal experience.
there are many times when I have been at SAP conferences, just because you talked about doors, Yelena, where I have wondered, oh my God, how do other people open this door, right? So especially the disabled people, you really have to go to a button and then press the button and open it. There is an extra step involved. And if you don't know where that button is, then, I mean, too bad. You have to wait until somebody comes along, right? So when you were talking about that, it just struck me. Sorry, Sarah, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I think my whole thought behind showing this example is a little bit of a myth buster of a question that I get asked a lot, especially when I'm talking about accessibility in terms of design is, well, isn't that going to make like a less exciting experience? Is it going to be boring? And you're like, no, this is something that you interact with on your day-to-day life, whether you realize it or not. For example, I mean, how many of you have opened a door today? Did you have a door knob or did you have a door handle? What's the difference? There is a big difference in whether or not you can actually grab it and twist versus something that a dog could open for you, whether you like it or not. Like, that is something that happens. And so, like you said, if you have your hands full of groceries and you have a door that swings open for you, does that make it less of an experience than if you were in a wheelchair and you needed to get through a door? So I think those are really important things to notice while you walk around your everyday life and you think about, am I doing something that is less of an experience? Probably not. But also, how can I make my experience just as exciting and energizing and life-giving to as someone else? And so those are the really innovative and valuable experiences that we bring to the table, and just having those conversations.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
go ahead then.
Go ahead, Elena.
I was just going to say that I saw in your notes that it's about designing for all. It's not designing for people with some kind of impairment or people with special needs. It's really about inclusivity and designing for everyone. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to that point, right? A lot of times things that were initially kind of used as an accessibility solution are actually something that does provide benefits to everyone. So like that automatic doors are an example of, and actually not just the person with their hands full of groceries, that's actually a good cost savings to a business potentially, right? Doors being open to the elements, usually one of the most expensive things in the building is to run climate control solutions. And so a lot of times places that have those, what's it like the turnstile doors, that's actually one of the reasons they're effective, not from an accessibility standpoint by any means, but they actually keep the energy usage lower. So automatic doors that open and close, I mean, they have a ton of benefits, right? They certainly have an accessibility upside for people that might not be able to work that door on their own. Even for people without accessibility issues, it's a convenience feature. And then for people paying to air condition that building, it's a net win on energy savings. So I think, there's also a stigma around accessibility. Things might cost us a lot of money, or, if you don't do them, it can certainly cost you money in lawsuits, but that's only one side. That's more the stick than the carrot. I think with a lot of other things, there's accessibility solutions that can be a cost savings, that can be a net experience benefit for everybody. And so it's, it doesn't always have to be looked at as an extra, as a cost, as a, something like that. It can often be a savings, a win, and a big, really just a win-win for everyone involved. So,
yeah.
I think one aspect, go ahead, Sarah.
No, go for it, Parv.
Yeah. So one of the aspects I think a lot of us don't think about is a lot of these, like Dan said, benefits us, right? I mean, and very good. I don't know whether the Google feature of just being able to, or the Microsoft feature of just being able to read into the word and just have the speech recognized and the text converted, I'm sure is also a great accessibility feature, but not just, but also for us. I mean, imagine the people who have carpal tunnel syndrome after several years of computer usage, and they can just now read everything into it and everything types it out. They just have to make many minor corrections, not so much use of keyboard required anymore, right? So really small things like this will help everybody. You may not even get carpal tunnel syndrome. So there are several advantages for everybody if we just keep in mind the people who can do the minimum, and then develop for the people who can do minimum. I think it also simplifies a lot of the applications as well. And simplicity is always the best design. I think, Sarah, you will say that, right? So
Yes.
over to you.
No, you're good. I was just going to add on to that point of, yeah, you're right. It's designing for all and designing for everyone, whether or not you have a form of a disability or not. I think part of that comes into how you define that. And there are people who have permanent disabilities, there are people who have situational disabilities or even just temporary disabilities, but how you interact with that is a huge value gain for you too, and for the person that's using it. And so I think one mere fact of life is that no matter what, we're all going to age. We're all going to maybe lose our vision, lose our hearing at some point. And technology is very much ingrained in our society now. And so if we don't start addressing this now, you have to build for yourself in the future too, of how would you, as someone who maybe can't hear, like to interact with a video or a podcast or something else like that. There are so many great experiences out there that we would love to share with people, no matter their situation.
And I really liked how some of those features that were probably novelties at some point, like that voice control or dictation that Paro just mentioned, they are becoming pretty much mainstream of many applications. We have so many voice control devices now, and it's very convenient. Like if I'm baking in the kitchen, I have my hands, all dirty and sticky, and suddenly my timer goes on. I just want to turn it off quickly. I don't want to touch anything with my hand, so I just yell at yell at my device to stop the timer. So that's very nice. And
Yeah.
I really like that one of your examples, Sarah, that you shared with us. There was an example of a website design for people with migraines. It was more just kind of subdued color and just less vibrant light, which is very I think friendly for people with migraines. And I don't have migraines per se, but I think all of us had very bad headaches at one point in our lives, and I imagine migraine is much worse than that. So, are there any other similar examples that you can mention?
Sure. Yeah, I would say, especially when it comes to actually designing a website or whatever application it is and having accessibility in mind, I would say a really great starting point, no matter where you start, is just to know your users. And so if you're designing a migraine website, knowing your users and knowing that fact that maybe you have sensitive eyes, or if you are designing a different website, for example, one really minor, some could say minor feature on a website like the National Domestic Violence Hotline website, there is in the corner a little square that if you are using that website and you just need it to clear out and go to Google in case you're around somewhere that you don't feel safe, that is a feature on that website. So knowing your users, knowing their situation, knowing why it is they're accessing your website, what it is they're looking for, are really key pieces of information that you should always have that starting point. And I think that goes back to that empathizing with your users, and how do you create an experience for them.
I worked for a pharma company for about 3.5 years, and this is something, I mean, while it was not tagged as accessibility or something that we used to always think about, can our patients really access the most important information when they need it? Because it was a severe diseases company. Can they access all the necessary information exactly at their fingertips when needed? So really placing the most important information where it is needed, that can be accessed by all the different users, goes a very long way, right? Another aspect is the whole aspect of now we have our mobile, we have the portrait mode and the landscape mode. How many applications can really turn around and work in either mode? And maybe it's just one mode that is more friendly towards certain people of certain abilities, and another mode that they prefer to use just because of the information that is available. So these are some of the things I think that we can keep in mind. There were many things in the past that we did not think in terms of accessibility when you were mentioning this example, and I thought of what we used to talk about patients that we can actually bring into the accessibility world. So we just have to again have our radar up. So
Yeah, it's great points, everyone. So I just want for a moment to bring it back into SAP and enterprise software world, because SAP products and enterprise software in general, it's frequently used in the situations where the users might be affected by their environment. So it could be conditions of, let's say, like very loud and noisy shop floor, or some conditions of poor lighting, or even just a very bad internet access. So do you think when SAP customers think about their applications, um, do they include those considerations enough? Should they be thinking more about all those different conditions? How does it affect their design thinking sessions that they do? Can you share something maybe from your experience in SAP projects?
So I can certainly share one example. And I don't think this would necessarily, if this falls under accessibility, but we do a lot of work, like you said, with people that are on the shop floor, that are in manufacturing environments, and they often have protective equipment that may not allow them to use something like a touchscreen. So if it's required that while they're on the shop floor, they have to have gloves on, then giving them an iPad that relies on touch input is not going to be something that's going to work. I also have been in those situations where some people on those shop floors are missing fingers or even limbs as a part of that dangerous work. And so again, I think that certainly that needs to be considered. I think the benefit of that we get in doing something like a design thinking workshop is that we get to walk the factory floor. We get to go with the users where they're going to do their job. And so we experience the loudness, we experience the dirtiness. We can talk to the people that are doing this process and get to know them and their specific needs. And so I think that level of being with people where they work and understanding what might be unique about their environment and what specific challenges might their users have is definitely important in creating.
I think Dan froze for a second. Sorry, Dan. We lost you for a second there.
But
back.
to tag on to what Dan was saying there, I think you're right. It really helps to walk in your user's shoes and really understand what it is, the process that they do from start to finish, whether it's a mobile app that they need to be able to see in the hot sun beating down on it and having that color look a lot different when it's almost blinding on your screen, to the user also works at night where having something so bright it can be blinding too. And so how do you create the light and the dark mode for an app that allows your user to be dynamic no matter where they are? And so these are really just key considerations that you do in a design thinking, where you understand what that user experience is, how they feel, any pain points that they might have, and how you can best approach that when you're creating a solution.
I think what struck me also in the ASUG presentation that John did, the panel, John and Stephanie together did, was also exactly this, about going to the warehouses and really understanding as a part of the building of the applications, really understanding the pain points of the warehouse people, because they are always moving around and getting the things. They are not just sitting in one place. Yep. So designing for them a kind of stationary solution would make it very difficult for them, right? So I really like this point, Sarah, what you mentioned, and Dan, about really being there with the users, seeing what all are the disabilities they have, what all are the problems they have, and then fix. Like Dan, you mentioned about missing fingers. I had a colleague who cut his finger also while he was sawing something with the saw machine at home. So just understanding all these kind of users and really thinking about what can be helpful for them will be, this is one of the empathetic way of developing software. So.
Yep. Yeah, great point. And so to kind of begin to wrap up our conversation today, I always would like to finish with some action items that our viewers and listeners can take. So we already talked about design thinking and importance of your accessibility considerations there. We talked about documents that are available for SAP customers. So what other actions, what can we do? What can we do better? What resources would you like to recommend?
Now, I have a lot of resources to recommend. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. But I think there are also a lot of great resources out there when it comes to accessibility. So like I mentioned before, there are free Chrome plugins, there are GitLab plugins that you can test your apps as you're developing them, which is really exciting. So those two again would be that I would recommend would be Wave or Axe by DQ. There are also really great resources out there when it comes to checklists. So as you're going, as you're designing something, as you're developing something, what is a checklist to make sure that you're following everything and that you didn't miss something that might have slipped through the cracks? And so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, is a really great example where you can look at those standards and see what it would look like for your app, whether it's an SAP or whether it's not. Those are really great resources as well. Another one that I would definitely recommend is this book here, Accessibility for Everyone. It's a wonderful book. It's also an audiobook. You can get it as an ebook. Just a great resource if you are new to accessibility. Maybe you haven't thought about it at all before until this podcast, and you are interested in learning more. It's a great way just to introduce it to you, introduce it to your team, think about it in different ways, do some research. How do you actually build it in? How do you test? Just a great framework for how you can incorporate it into your everyday work or life itself too. So those would be my top recommendations.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. Dan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I think one, maybe I'll give one that's more about learning and one that's more action oriented. I think one of the most helpful things for me has been to follow some accessibility advocates on social media or on blog sites like Medium. And I have not met this woman, so I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. But Sherry Byrne Haber, I think she was Medium's 2020 Writer of the Year, or at least in a category, but I think she works at VMware. She's a big accessibility advocate, and I think following her, connecting to some more people, following some others as a result of following her, to seeing the conversations that take place, the challenges people have, the articles they post, the tools they post. I think it's just been really helpful to learn more about that and get hear the conversations that are taking place and see what resources that I should be following up on to learn more. On the kind of do side of things, I was able to attend a really good presentation at was that AxeCon, Sarah? That it was a couple months ago. Yeah. And what they focus on, it was actually about accessibility for project managers. But sort of the main point was actually that there's not really accessibility for design or for dev or for PMs. I mean, there's certainly different ways for viewing it, but one trap that people can fall on is thinking that oh, design, they designed something that's accessible. Maybe,
Right.
did you check that? Developers, they might think, oh, designers might think, well, we don't have to design it a certain way. When they do the form, they'll make it so you can tab through. They'll know how to set that up. They'll know how to, do it for a screen reader. And so people can make a lot of assumptions about who's doing accessibility on a project and who's going to keep track of whether or not those types of considerations are built in. So I think just whatever role you're in, learn more about accessibility and then start asking questions and seeing where it's being built into your product and how you can help. Because it's not just a design thing or a developer thing or something that a project manager puts on a checklist to make sure. Well, I mean, I guess that would help make sure that it's done. But the point is that everyone needs to be accountable for it and not assume that some other function in the process of creating this application or website is going to take care of it. Everyone anywhere along the process can be that advocate. So, learn more about it and then start, being that advocate, that squeaky wheel, that person that asks questions. And I think you'll be able to move the needle forward.
I think I really like that aspect of everybody in every part of the process should actually think about it. So I mean, when we talk about Mindsets products, we have from strategy, design, implement, and manage, right? So at each phase, as we sign off, I think it's important to also sign off on an accessibility aspect. One thing maybe I would like to leave for decision makers is think about how many employees, what is the mix of the employees in your own workforce, because that having that mix of employees will bring in that empathy, and that will help you to also design and build applications that are relevant for a very wide variety of people out there in the market. And that will make us empathetic as well as we see our colleagues struggle through. I mean, I can always, I keep going back to SAP, but I really think SAP has a very good program for disabled people as well as for autistic people and so on. And that has really enhanced the understanding within the organization of the employees regarding the challenges that these colleagues face, and they can take in those lessons into whatever they are doing on a daily basis. So I think that having that mix in own workforce also makes a big difference. And then also when you think about office spaces, think in terms of is it accessible to the different places, even small things like having reserved parking, or even are the copiers in the right place, is that accessible to people? It's just these small things in daily life. How can we make life easier for a very differently abled person? So
Yeah, it's great points, everyone. And I like Dan's note that do not just assume that accessibility will be somehow taken care of. As they say, assumption is a mother of all screw ups. So don't just think, oh, Fiori is kind of accessible by design, so that's going to be taken care of. I mean, yes, but actually no. So you really need to think about it and take it into consideration. And empathy and accessibility go hand in hand. And just think within your organization and also think about your users. And that's a way to accomplish result that is inclusive and accessible to everyone. So, and on this note, I think we can close our conversation today. And I would like to thank our guests today, Sarah and Dan and Paru from Mindset. And thank you, our listeners and viewers, for joining us today. And I hope to see you next time. Bye.
And I hope
Bye.
you all
Thank you,
celebrate
Yelena.
Global Accessibility Awareness
Yes.
Day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.